just having joined us for our recent live event. We were so pleased to have so many questions and comments that we've decided to continue the magic and answer a number of the questions that we didn't have time to cover during the 30-minute live event. And just a reminder, the live event video was recorded. So if you didn't have a chance to join us live, you can also watch the recording or the archive of that video on our Facebook page, as well as on our iGeriCare.ca events page. So now to some of the other excellent questions and comments that came in from caregivers. How important is nutrition for someone with cognitive impairment? It sounds like this person has not received a diagnosis of dementia, but there's cognitive impairment, and that person and their spouse are in their 90s.
Mm-hmm. So nutrition can be very important because nutritional deficiencies can be a cause of cognitive impairment. So specifically vitamin B12 may be actually a treatable cause of dementia. Most commonly it's not treatable, but there are instances where if the vitamin B12 levels are low enough, you can replete them by giving somebody vitamin B12 and their cognition may improve. So that's important. The same goes for thiamine and some other nutrients. So those are rare in terms of how many people are actually presenting with cognitive impairment, but they always must be considered when somebody comes into the clinic. If somebody is generally malnourished, then that impacts all aspects of their life. So if they're not getting the nutrients they need and they're not getting the number of calories they need or protein that they need, then that can be very detrimental to someone's cognition as well and just their general overall ability to function. So it might not be a cause of dementia on its own, but certainly if you do have cognitive impairment, it can make things worse. And this usually comes into the final side of the nutrition paradigm is, are there specific, nutrients or superfoods or anything like that that can improve your cognition or magically cure your Alzheimer's disease? And the answer for that is no. There's nothing that we've found to date that can actually boost, your level of cognition or reverse the effects of Alzheimer's disease. So, oftentimes people may talk about coconut oil, which alters the metabolism in your brain supposedly, but that hasn't really borne itself out in the science to date.
There's not been any strong scientific evidence to support coconut
The one
oil.
thing, there is some mixed evidence for vitamin E, but I don't really recommend my patients take that necessarily because it's not strong, convincing, reproducible evidence.
A good healthy diet, which is probably generally good for your overall health as well as brain health, and a balanced diet nutritionally, that's probably the best advice. There's some limited evidence that suggests the quote-unquote Mediterranean diet, but I would say good healthy well-rounded diet. It's not going to be a miracle cure, but as part of generally healthy lifestyle habits.
Yeah, and I mean, the nice thing about the Mediterranean diet is that there's more evidence for it to decrease your risk of cardiovascular illness. So if you're going to have something that has some benefit to your cognition, although limited, and some benefit, with respect to cardiovascular disease, then go for that. And you can Google Mediterranean diet and look at recipes and things like that to find out, if you're going to switch to that, what exactly you'd need to do.
The other thing is sometimes vitamins can get quite expensive. I think a lot of people buy into expensive supplements. If you have a good healthy diet, you probably don't need most additional vitamin supplements, and there's probably no miracle. Your body can only absorb limited amounts of them, but definitely worth getting assessed for one of those specific vitamin deficiencies. So this was another excellent question, which was, what are, or can you describe the stages of dementia? And I guess it also ties in with a follow-up question, which was, how do I know when to stop being the primary caregiver? So I think those questions went hand in hand in terms of understanding kind of the progression, the stages, the severity, and is there a particular point at which it may be, beyond scope in some ways to still be the primary caregiver.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And there are there are different stages. It's a continuous process. So it's hard to mark off exactly when, somebody is changing, but generally, we all have memory and thinking changes as we get older. Might not be able to process things quite as quick, or, do skill testing puzzles as quick, or remember everything that we would have remembered before. But so, everyone has a little bit of change in their cognitive or memory and thinking abilities as they get older. There's a first stage, which is called mild cognitive impairment, where you're noticing that your cognition has changed somewhat. You're having more problems doing the things that you used to do. And if you come in and see a doctor, they'll be able to do tests, pen and paper tests, that will show that you're not functioning as well as most people would in that set of circumstances, but you're able to do your day-to-day functional activities, meaning you can still get to the grocery store, you can still get your taxes done. They may take you a lot longer than they used to, and you've noted that, but you're still able to get by independently. And then you transition into a mild dementia where you're still able to do most things for yourself, but you can't function independently on your own. And this is kind of borne out in the tests that we're doing as well. So one is the mini mental state examination, or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And so you'll be able to see the scores slowly getting worse. And in the moderate stage, that's when you're requiring significant amounts of help to get by day to day. You may see some emergence of more personality changes as well. People may have more emotional lability and be less flexible in their thinking. They may need queuing to take all of their medications. They won't be able to get to a grocery store. And then finally, the severe stage happens when you're almost needing complete care day to day. Somebody's attending to all of your needs all of the time. And it's that transition from moderate to severe where, most often we're finding people requiring escalating levels of care, like transition to a nursing home.
What I would say is also just, I guess, a simple recap of what you just described so well. There's mild cognitive impairment. Sometimes people talk about MCI, and that is not dementia. There's some objective changes in memory, but it's not causing a functional impairment.
Yeah.
And then at the early stage or mild stage of dementia, there's some functional changes and some mild changes with memory or other cognitive impairments. Moderate and severe really refer to the progression of more deficits and more functional impairments.
Absolutely.
With severe stage requiring a lot of assistance. So the important thing to realize is dementia is not one disease, it's multiple different diseases, and we outline those various types, or the most common types of dementia, within the iGeriCare lessons on the website. And that may also have an important impact on when somebody may need to stop with respect to being the primary caregiver, because certain types of dementia may have more prominent behavioral symptoms early on in the course of the dementia, which could be very challenging, or other dementias there may be symptoms like incontinence that make it more challenging. So the issue, I think, as we talked about in the live event, is there's going to be a lot of variation between families and caregivers. What are the other supports? It definitely, the severity of the dementia also has an impact, and then maybe the type of dementia and the type of associated symptoms, like behavioral symptoms, may be more challenging for
Those are all great points. Those are great points.
So another great question here: are there support groups for spouses who have lost a partner to dementia? And I guess we mentioned earlier community resources like the Alzheimer's Society. Many of the Alzheimer's societies and many local and regions do have support groups for caregivers of dementia, and I think many people do find them incredibly helpful, because it can be a very isolating job as a caregiver. Do you want to say a little bit more about sort of the caregiver support groups?
Yeah, we've definitely had caregivers in our clinic that have found them incredibly useful. And again, I always caution people, some people will find it useful, some people won't, but you'll never know unless you actually go and try. And so whether it's an individual memory clinic that's putting on a support group, or whether it's the Alzheimer's Society, occasionally there are also additional community groups that will put on support networking events as well. So, we have the Hamilton Council on Aging and here, but you'll be able to find things as well, or hopefully we'll be able to find things in your community. And so, oftentimes people are hesitant to go to them initially. They wonder what they might gain, but after they go, they're so glad that they went, to be able to understand that they're not alone in their process or their journey, and other people are struggling with the exact issues or similar issues to what they're experiencing. So.
And what we will say is we all know caregivers of patients whose they were a caregiver of someone with dementia and their loved one passed away, and they have continued to attend those support groups and actually often act as a very helpful resource for newly diagnosed people with dementia or caregivers just coming in because of their experience with the dementia journey. So I think the other place, if you have had a loved one passed away, is most areas or regions have groups focused on bereavement. So I think you may continue to derive support if your loved one has passed away from the caregiver support groups that you can find. If you find that you're more overwhelmed with grief or sadness related to the loss, something like a bereavement group may also be helpful and appropriate.
And sometimes we found as well, the people that have struggled with loss, they've lost the person they were caring for. As you said, they feel empowered to help other people that are now struggling with what they've just been through. So, people may need to take time afterwards to grieve their loss, but sometimes people feel very empowered to maintain their contact with those groups as well.
And anonymous shout out to people that helped us in the development of the iGeriCare lessons and website, because we definitely, as part of our testing process, we really benefited from the wisdom of our reviewers. So.
The super users that have been through all aspects of the illness and are very involved in the community. But yes, we're very appreciative of all the people that provided input for us.
One of the caregivers sent in a really interesting and valuable comment about the importance of balancing what they termed respect and risk. So balancing the respect for the person with dementia, respecting their autonomy, not getting frustrated and cutting them off. And I think that's what they were talking about, respecting their prior wishes and their autonomy, but also balancing some of that respect for autonomy with risk and safety issues, and I think they've really hit the nail on the head with a challenging dilemma that faces many caregivers at a certain point in the illness.
Absolutely, I think it's always safest to err on the side of autonomy, or the individual's ability to determine what's happening to them or taking place in their lives, because as we mentioned, dementia is a continuous process, and people retain a lot of their memory and thinking abilities earlier on in the disease and haven't changed that much, and are still very much aware of what's happening to them, and they can even be aware of the fact that they have a dementia and are struggling with it. So those people should be very much involved in their care and what's happening to them and what's not happening to them. And then there are other people that even at the beginning of the illness don't understand that they have a disease, and we call that lack of insight. And we can also help them deal with the process and leave them to make decisions until they get to the point where they're really causing a safety risk for themselves or the people around them. So for instance, we mentioned fire risk earlier on. If people are insisting that, they be given access to their cigarettes but are, finding burnt blankets or things like that around, or they're not able to remember to take the stove off, then that's a big problem. Or turn the stove off and take the pots and pans off the stove. So once that starts to happen and they're starting to be a risk to themselves, we've kind of gone over that balance point where we need to intervene and say that even if they want something a certain way, we can't handle that collectively.
You're really in some cases, putting not just the caregiver at risk, but imagine a fire in an apartment building.
Absolutely.
That is really putting many at risk. So there's lots of particular safety issues. Driving is another one in the early stages of the illness, where that sort of respect for autonomy and safety risks come into play. So I'd encourage you to look through our lesson on safety. I think we have one that covers some of those. Maybe make a checklist and talk it over with your healthcare team, something like that. But a really excellent point around that balance between respect and risk. So speaking of balance, another great question came in. It was a working caregiver, somebody working full-time, also working as a family caregiver. And they had a comment about what can you say about work-life balance, lifestyle, exercise, nutrition with regards to caregiving?
Yeah, that is a great question. Sometimes we picture work-life balance as, a 30-30-60 split between the various activities in our lives, and that we should be able to do all of those on a daily or a weekly basis. But sometimes that's not possible as a caregiver. And so you may have to picture a balance in life over the course of a month or over several months, where you may be at it full time for 7 weeks and then maybe you get a week off. And so I think the first step is setting some form of limit for yourself, if it's possible, and asking for help. The earlier the possible, and as we discussed previously, all the different ways that you can ask for help so that you can protect some time for yourself to do activities that are enjoyable for yourself. And right along, the issue that comes right along with that is then the feeling of guilt of being away from the person that you're caring for. And so it's completely normal to feel guilty, but you also have to deal with that and understand that to be the best caregiver for the person you're caring for over the long run, you have to take care of yourself. So even if it's short periods of time, getting out and exercising, whether it's walking, running, finding something you enjoy, making sure you're eating appropriately and staying socially connected to the people that you care about. At the very least, find something that you enjoy doing and get out and do that. So if it's too painful to exercise or, do those things, then, find something you enjoy and make some time, even if it's a small amount of time, to do it, and don't feel guilty.
So I think...
Or try not to feel guilty.
I think there's what has now come to attention, because it was not well studied before, is that many informal family caregivers do not have work-life balance. They have their paid work and their unpaid work as caregivers. So in fact, data and studies now looking at the caregivers in Ontario, caregivers across the country, show very, very high levels of stress, high levels of mental illness and burnout in informal family caregivers, which is truly one of the reasons why we helped to produce iGeriCare, was to try to give people more tools. And, we have several lessons that really emphasize, getting help for the caregiver, care for the caregiver. You need to look after yourself or you can't be an effective caregiver. So, it is important, if you are feeling overwhelmed and stressed, you may well be at risk of depression anxiety, burnout. And so it's very important that you talk with your own healthcare provider. I know you are probably spending a lot of your time focused on the care needs of the person with dementia that you're the caregiver for, but we can't emphasize enough that it is essential that you look after your own health and mental health as a caregiver. And some of these suggestions around work-life balance, around getting additional supports, those can help, but it is really important that you, as the caregiver, keep tabs on your own health, eat well, stay active, do whatever you can to get support so you can carve out some downtime for yourself so that there's a marginal amount of balance. And this brings us to our sort of final question for this additional session, which was around how to accept help. And I think the post or the comment that came in actually was this can cut both ways. So there are sometimes cases where the patient, the person with dementia, may not be accepting of help. They don't want to let the home care person into the home, or they refuse to go to the doctor's appointments. And then I think what we also see sometimes is the caregiver who finds it hard to accept help as well. They feel compelled to do all the caregiving themselves. Even though they're feeling burned out, they are reluctant to access home care or community services. Can you talk a little bit about the accepting of help issue?
Sure. I think we touched on it enough with respect to balancing risk and harm for the person that won't accept help, and the person with dementia not being able to accept help. And the challenge is there's no easy way to try and make somebody understand. And so really what we try and do in the clinic is just let people know how hard it is. And we've come back to this point a lot of times. And, it's not to take pity on caregivers. It's not to demean what they're doing in any way or try and make it more negative than it needs to be. It's just that once people understand that it's a very challenging job, then they're more and normalize that it's very hard for caregivers, then sometimes they're more likely to accept that help and be accepting of kind of everything that's taking place around them.
And that may be for caregivers reaching out to other family members, or if the family members have been reaching out, allowing them in. It may mean reaching out to various home care supports or the healthcare team to just say, we're on overwhelm, we need additional resources. But I think, as you said, sometimes it's a case of the having to work and maybe even persevere. If the person with dementia has a reluctance to have that help, it might be incumbent or necessary for the caregiver to say, you know what, I need this help. You need to allow these people in, and look after your own health as a caregiver. Seek out those resources and help prevent the burnout. So you may feel like you're on top of your caregiving, but having that additional help and reaching out for some community or home resources or other family supports may help to prevent some of the stress. So.
We also don't mean to say that, if you get supports into your house or if you get some sort of respite, that all of your problems will go away, right? Or that caregiving will suddenly become easy, because it won't. It will be a significant challenge, but we look for reducing harm or reducing the burden to make it sustainable. So you can do it over the long term or the long haul instead of, trying to take everything on and do it all your own and reaching that critical stage of burnout where you can't handle anything. So I think that's important too. We're all working with limited resources in a limited system in an imperfect world, but if we can kind of come together and work as teams, then we'll be more likely to be successful as a group of people that are trying to provide care collectively for people that have dementia.
So that concludes our secondary accessory session, where we had a chance to answer some of the excellent questions and comments from our live event. I want to thank our sponsor again in this separate video, our main sponsor being the Canadian Centre for Aging and Brain Health, powered by Baycrest, as well as our Division of E-Learning team, the Jarrah Centre through Hamilton Health Sciences, the Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation, and our other partners that contributed along the way. This video is a recorded one and is available through our Facebook page as well as through our iGeriCare.ca/events page. The live session was also recorded. So the recording or the video that was made from that is also available in both of those locations. There's also a link where you can provide us with some valuable feedback through a survey. So we would really appreciate any suggestions that you have. Give us some feedback on this live session and give us some feedback on this recorded session where we were able to catch up and answer some of the questions. Thank you all very much.